Imagine it's a Tuesday afternoon, 2:30 p.m. Your phone goes. It's the operations manager. Ticket volumes have spiked, customers are reporting errors on the checkout page, and nobody knows why. Your team starts digging. One engineer is in Dynatrace looking at application errors. Another is in AWS checking infrastructure. Someone else is trawling through ServiceNow trying to work out if there's a related change request. The Slack thread is already 12 messages long and climbing. By 3 p.m. you know something is broken. By 3:30 p.m. you've narrowed it down to the application layer. By 4 p.m. you find it. A deployment that went out at 2:18 p.m. introduced a configuration error. 90 minutes of investigation for a problem that with the right visibility should have taken 10. The gap between when something breaks and when you understand why is what costs your organization time, money, and customer trust. And that's what we're going to talk about fixing today. My name's Graham Davies. I'm a technical product manager here at SquaredUp. And for those of you who don't know me, I've been a Microsoft MVP in cloud and data center management and a senior premier field engineer at Microsoft and subsequently in large enterprises with a focus on monitoring, observability, and service management. And for those of you who are new to SquaredUp, we've been helping enterprise IT teams get visibility across their monitoring estates for over a decade. And what we're seeing more and more as environments get more complex and tool stacks get bigger is that the problem isn't a lack of data, it's a lack of connection between the data you already have. First up, the webinar is being recorded and a link will be shared with attendees shortly after the session. Secondly, microphones will be muted during the presentation to prevent any background noise. So that means if you do have any questions, and I'm sure there'll be plenty, please put those questions into the chat and Ash will look to answer them during the presentation and we'll do a review of them at the end of the webinar. And here's what we'll cover in this webinar. First of all, we'll look at why so many organizations have a visibility gap across their tool sets and what that actually costs. Then we'll discuss what a unified visibility layer looks like in practice. After that, Ash and I will show you SquaredUp Cloud and how it delivers that unified layer across an enterprise. And finally, we'll cover next steps so you can try it out for yourselves. First up though, what is SquaredUp and more importantly, what isn't SquaredUp? Because before we go any further, I want to be precise about SquaredUp actually is, because this really matters. SquaredUp Cloud is not a monitoring tool. It does have some built-in monitoring capability, and I'll come to those later, but it's not here to replace Datadog, Dynatrace, SCOM, Splunk, or anything else in your stack. SquaredUp Cloud is your visibility and intelligence layer, sitting above all of those tools, connecting them together, and more importantly, correlating data across them. Think of it as the layer that makes everything you've already invested in work together rather than in isolation. That correlation is what gives your teams and your stakeholders the unified view that they need to act fast. So why do so many organizations have a visibility gap? I guess because most monitoring stacks weren't designed. They grew, they evolved, they sprawled. You might have started a decade ago with on-premises monitoring, perhaps SCOM for Windows and applications, SolarWinds for networking. Then along came Azure Monitor or AWS CloudWatch for cloud workloads. But those have limitations, so you bought in Dynatrace, New Relic or Datadog for critical application monitoring. Then Prometheus and Grafana for cloud-native workloads. Salesforce or SAP for business-critical software as a service. And that's before networking, storage, backup and security platforms enter the picture. Gartner put it really well. Heads of infrastructure and operations often struggle with fragmented visibility, increased costs, and delayed decision-making when operational issues arise due to the number of monitoring and observability tools. The root cause is straightforward. As each tool gets onboarded, its data stays locked inside it. The dashboards stay inside it. Nothing else talks to anything else. And this creates a number of problems I see consistently. First up, fragmented visibility. You've invested in best-in-class tools, ServiceNow for ticketing, Dynatrace for APM, Splunk for logs and security, AWS or Azure for your infrastructure. Each one excellent at its job, but none of them talk to each other. So when an incident spans multiple systems, and they always do, your team is manually stitching together a picture from across multiple screens, multiple tabs, multiple logins. And this leads us to the second challenge. Every context switch costs time, every tab costs focus, and while your team is playing detective, the customer is waiting and the SLA clock is ticking. This fragmented visibility also makes correlation difficult. ServiceNow shows ticket volumes, but not what's causing them. Dynatrace shows application errors, but not which customers are affected. Splunk shows log anomalies, but not whether they're tied to a deployment that went out an hour ago. Those dots simply don't get connected. Problems that span multiple systems stay hidden in the gaps until they're too big to miss. With SquaredUp, that changes. Ticket volumes spike, you can see it correlates with a deployment from 30 minutes ago. Application errors climbing, you can see they started the moment a configuration change was pushed. Hidden problems become visible early, while they're still easier to fix. And as a techie, I love getting into the weeds of the tool sets, but at the end of the day, I need to understand that I'm here or there to support the business and not just my own technical curiosity. We might talk in code, our monitoring tools might speak in metrics. The business needs to understand impact. Which services are affected? Which customers? What's the revenue exposure? What's the risk? Without that context, it's almost impossible to prioritize effectively, and teams end up chasing alerts that don't really matter, while the issues that do matter are buried somewhere in the noise. And finally, let's not forget about that reporting ritual. We've all been there. The weekly stand-up pack, the executive summary, the SLA compliance report that someone has to manually compile every Friday afternoon. It takes hours, it's out of date the moment it's sent, and frankly, nobody fully trusts it anyway. With SquaredUp, you build the dashboards once. After that, the work is done. When your operation manager wants a status update, share a link. When the executive team wants to see service performance, share a link. They see live data, not last week's numbers. The reporting ritual is replaced by always-on visibility that every stakeholder can access whenever they need it. So modern IT teams are drowning in excellent tools that don't talk to each other. When something goes wrong, teams lose precious time manually assembling a picture from disconnected data, while customers wait and costs grow. SquaredUp Cloud is the unified layer that sits above your existing tool sets and brings all of that data together into a single source of truth. We're not a monitoring tool, we're not a data lake, we're not replacing anything you already have. We surface the data that you do already have, whether that be on premises, for example, vCenter or SCOM or SolarWinds, or across your cloud services from ServiceNow to Azure, AWS, Datadog, New Relic, Dynatrace, and many, many more. Operations teams, engineers, executives, they each get their own tailored dashboards built from the same underlying data. Real-time ticket volumes, SLA compliance, application health, deployment history, all in one place, correlated with proactive alerting and reporting. That's the command and control center your teams have been missing, and that's SquaredUp Cloud. Now let's take a look at the building blocks of how SquaredUp Cloud works before we jump into the live demo. The first thing you need to do with SquaredUp Cloud is connect your data sources. These are read-only connections to the tools and platforms you want to surface data from. You then visualize that data into tiles on a dashboard. And then you group dashboards together into workspaces, logical containers with their own access controls. For a managed service provider, a workspace per customer makes sense. Internally, you're typically organized by team or by application or by business service. Set monitors against your data streams. The data isn't just visualized, it's evaluated against health criteria. And that health state rolls up from tile to dashboard to workspace. So your engineers have the detail while executives can see surfaced high-level KPIs at a glance. One data set appropriately tailored for every audience. Monitors can also trigger notifications, Slack, email, Teams, ServiceNow tickets. Okay, that's the why and the what. Let's get into the how. Let's jump into a live environment now and walk through it, see how it all really works. We'll do this in two stages. First, Ash is going to give an overview of a dashboard which contains data from across an enterprise to reinforce these concepts. Then I'll take a look at how these capabilities work together, especially the health roll-ups, to create dashboards that span the needs of stakeholders across an organization.
That's great. Thank you, Graham. So this is a dashboard that contains data across many different data sources. This is built into a workspace that, as you can see, is called the Lego Swag Store. And this is an application that we use at events to kind of drive conversations and help us to understand what essentially you are using within your organizations. Over on the left, you can see the selection of data sources that we've connected. You can see a mix of cloud providers, APM tools. We even have some ITSM data, as well as some scripting and some options for pulling back data from on-premise systems as well. Now, what you'll see within the tiles is obviously a mix of visualizations across the different data sets that are available as well. So we have time series data coming from Azure Monitor and CloudWatch. We have summary information for cost coming from Azure. We also have things like the pipeline monitoring from ADO, data from a REST API, and the list goes on. This dashboard really is the sort of art of the possible. The ability to combine data across any data sources that you want to connect to SquaredUp to really drive the dashboarding into your users' day-to-day lives. If we take a look at an example of one of these tiles, we'll just have a look at this one here for Azure Monitor. This is built using very simply a connection into our Azure environment. We can select our data sources here over on the left. Once we've picked where the data is coming from, we then want to pick the data that we want to stream. And very importantly, we are only streaming this data. We're not grabbing it, storing it in yet another database, or duplicating it. We are requesting it live when you're viewing the dashboard from that underlying tool. Now, all of these data streams will have a slightly different experience with how they're configured. Typically, you choose the data stream, so what you want to visualize. There may be some scoping around objects or entities from the underlying tool, and there may also be some parameters that you have to configure in order to request that data. As you can see here, we've picked a number of virtual machines, and then we've chosen a metric that we want to visualize within the tile. And then once you've got that data into the tool, it's then a case of selecting which visualization you want it to land in. And that just helps you to really ensure that that data is presented in the way that's meaningful to your audience. And then on top of that, you do obviously have time frame where applicable. You have the option to filter, group, and sort as well. So if you wanted to filter in or out different columns worth of data, you have the ability to group if you wanted to summarize the data into the donor, or perhaps you wanted to provide some kind of aggregation based on a timestamp. You also have the ability to just sort the data as well, so either alphabetically or numerically, based on one of the columns that are provided. And if you want to do anything more complex than this, there are some additional options that I'll talk about in a moment. Now, once you've grabbed the data, you are obviously then choosing the visualization, but if you want to drive monitoring off the back of that, it's a simple case of just toggling on our monitoring feature here over on the right, where you can either drive a threshold-driven monitor, and that could be red, amber, green status, or it could just be a two-state into error if you wanted it to be. You have the option of picking a state column if one is available. So typically this may be something like, is the VM powered on? Is a property returned that matches a healthy state versus an error state? And you can configure your own states here within the columns configuration as well. I'm not going to touch on that today in the interest of time, but you do have the ability to define your own concepts of health using that option. And then there is also the ability to use script monitoring as well, and this is typically the more advanced options for monitoring something where you want to drive custom conditions essentially to evaluate the data. Now, off the back of that monitoring, you'll see a health state represented within the tile, so you can see this here. You also have the option to roll that up to the dashboard and then to the workspace. And then a tile, a dashboard, or a workspace can actually be used in other dashboards, giving you roll-ups. And that essentially gives you the ability to create views like this one you see here, low-level metrics, into a parent dashboard that's perhaps useful for the wider organization or management, where they don't necessarily need to know the nitty-gritty. You do also have the option of providing custom reporting as well by toggling on our SQL Analytics feature. And this essentially allows you to create multiple data sets and then drive your own custom reporting using a SQL query. And that data can come from the same tool, or it can come from multiple, combining costs from AWS and Azure is a core example. And the monitoring can also be applied to the SQL Analytics data. And then finally, you can then drive notifications off of this as well into your tool of choice, whether that's notifying teams via an email, perhaps dropping a notification to Slack or Teams. You can even raise instance here within ServiceNow. And then finally, you also have the option of custom, which is Webhook Outbound, and Zapier, which is essentially just a big if this then that engine with a couple of thousand tools attached to it. This can also be granularly configured, so you can send all monitors within the workspace to the same destination, or you can pick and choose as required specific tile monitors to go to specific destinations. And that just means that the teams who are responsible for the output of those notifications will understand exactly what you want them to when something is triggered. Finally, within that notification, they'll see not just, what has happened, so this is the reason for why this has triggered, but they'll also get the little snapshot as well. They'll see the tile image so that they can see at a glance exactly what's happened at that point in time. And it does also include a link back to the product so that if they need to go and investigate, perhaps they want to explore that data to learn more, they can essentially do that quite easily within just a couple of clicks. That's all from me. Back over to you, Graham.
Thank you for that great explanation, Ash. It's really interesting to see that we can pull data from quite literally anywhere using all the different data sources available to us. What I'm going to look at now very briefly is just an overview of putting that into practice, and perhaps start off by looking at an executive level view and then drill down into the infrastructure and application views to show how it was built. From an executive viewpoint, the key questions a dashboard should answer are we healthy right now? Are we trending in the right direction? And do we have anything that needs my attention? RAG status tiles are here. Red, amber, green are clear, concise and easy to see. They can roll up health from other workspaces or other dashboards or other tiles. They're big, they're simple, they're impossible to misread. So what we might have here across the top is an infrastructure health state, hybrid estate health rolled up from AWS, from Azure, from on-premises. What we might also have under here is some of the key applications that we need to make sure are healthy, whether they're customer-facing services where the overall health of our externally visible applications can be confirmed, or internal applications, ERP, HR systems, collaboration tools. Further down the executive view, towards the middle, we can show some operational pulse data. These give a sense of whether things are getting better or worse over time. Numbers with a direction of travel matter or are equally as important as just an absolute figure. But we might have information here such as the number of open P1 and P2 incidents, maybe with a count or maybe with a 7-day spark line, and is it trending up or down? To be honest, if we've got 17 P1 incidents, I think it's time for me to look for another job. But that's just the data we've got coming out of our demonstration or demo environment. Other sorts of data we might want to have on here, things like SLA compliance, perhaps it's just a single percentage, are we meeting our commitments? We'd also might want to see mean time to resolve. Again, trend matters as much as the actual number itself. Are we getting better? And also the amount of change activity over the, say, 7 days, the number of deployments or changes, useful in context where perhaps incidents are elevated, so executives can see, well, is something changing? Are our changes working? But they can do it at a quick, simple, high level. All of this is the sort of data that you can pull from ServiceNow or your service management tool, whatever that may be. What executives would also probably like to see on this is some business context, because this is what would separate a good executive dashboard from a repackaged operational dashboard. These are the sorts of tiles that connect IT health to business outcomes. Things like affected customers or affected users. If you can surface this from Dynatrace or Datadog, even an approximation is powerful. After all, 47 users affected or 5 customers impacted means much more to an executive than 3 application errors. What you might also be able to show is top open incidents by business impact, perhaps highlighting critical customers, key customers, that if there are issues that they're suffering, executives need to know about it and they need to know about it quickly. It may be just a short list, a maximum of 5 or 6 rows ranked by severity or business service affected. They certainly don't need a full incident table, just enough to know what the headline issues are. What can also be useful to put on an executive level dashboard is upcoming planned maintenance, even just a simple list of scheduled changes in the next 7 days. After all, executives are often caught off guard by maintenance windows, and this is an easy way of just removing that. What I forgot to say at the start was that we're looking at the executive workspace at the moment. So over here, we've got the executive workspace. And as I've gone through these different tiles, some of the underlying data comes directly from the connected data source. So service management would be an example of that. The number of P1 incidents comes from ServiceNow. We're connecting across to ServiceNow, we're doing a table query, and we're pulling back active incidents with priority 1. Some of the data, the infrastructure and the application tiles specifically, are surfaced from tiles and dashboards on other workspaces. I might have started at the top, so to speak, at the executive level, but let's take a look in a moment at the infrastructure and application dashboards, because that's where this health is being surfaced up from. So if I'm looking at my AWS infrastructure, let's have a look at how we've configured that. We're looking at a roll-up of health from another tile, from an AWS tile, from an infrastructure dashboard, from an infrastructure workspace as well. And this is the real power of SquaredUp Cloud, is that we can define our applications, define our infrastructure however we have configured it in our own environment, and then we can set up the monitors and we can roll up that health, just as we can roll up health from an application to the dashboard to show an executive, yes, we're healthy, we're good. So let's switch personas and put our infrastructure hat on, where the level of detail will go up significantly compared to the executive dashboard, although we still need to surface issues clearly. Engineers shouldn't have to go hunting for the headline. This also changes the questions that our dashboards are looking to answer. Now again, we want more detail. So what's happening, what's unhealthy right now, and where is it? What's under pressure and likely to become a problem? And is this a cloud problem or an on-premises problem, or does it span both? We might want to have a copy of the executive dashboard here so that we can see what the executives are seeing. It's your call, but I always like to see what my manager sees so that I can make sure I'm on the same page as them and I'm not accidentally letting slip that things are far, far worse than I'm willing to show them. Even at the executive level here, though, we can see an issue with our on-premises infrastructure, and we can see we have an issue with our sales application, which we know is hosted on premises. We haven't yet migrated that to the cloud. So I can go to my overview infrastructure health, and just down here, and I can get a list of my virtual machines from SCOM on premises. In the middle, from Azure, my virtual machines, and from AWS, my instances. And I can see quite clearly here that we have a problem with sales-SQL01, and that is part of our sales application. So it's starting to come together that, yeah, the SQL Server is the underlying issue here. From here, I can go into my server metrics. So I've set up a virtual machine metrics view here. I can see that CPU and memory are looking good. Well, I can see that they're healthy, but there's rather a lot of servers on there. So what I can do is come up to all objects, deselect, select all, and then just pull up the SQL Server sales-SQL01, and that will update the charts just for that particular virtual machine. And again, it's just really re-highlighting what I said. CPU and memory are fine, but I can quickly see that there's a SCOM alert here, and it's low disk space. And I can also go down to my disk health, and I can see that, yeah, the F drive on SQL Sales 01 has an issue. If we were hooked up to ServiceNow, we could potentially see that a change was applied, say, 30 minutes ago on that server, which would suggest that this is where we might want to look in depth. Perhaps the change has filled up a logical drive. Perhaps the change is still running and it's causing issues. We can quickly look at that change request, see who's authorized it, see who's executing it, and potentially look to review why it went out during business hours. But we've been able to quickly, just in one portal, identify that it's an on-premise issue with a specific server which has just had a change applied or is still being applied. And within all of this, we can also double check our Azure and AWS dashboards as well, our infrastructure as well. So within the Azure, we can go down to VM Compute, and we can start to see virtual machine information coming back from Azure. We can see servers, virtual machines, top CPU, least memory available. If I want to have a look at a specific machine, I can click on it here in the list of virtual machines, and it will drill down and give me a perspective, a dashboard of just that specific virtual machine. So again, all within this one portal, we're being able to quickly look at information that's scanning on-premises, spanning Azure, spanning AWS. And we've also got an AWS dashboard here for EC2 instances showing much the same information, CPU, network information, and the health of our AWS instances. All rolling up health to either our executive view or our own infrastructure health view. And that's what is really sort of important to specify here. If we go back to this dashboard at the top, it's clear that only one tile is red. It's a SCOM alert for an on-premises server. Without SquaredUp, an ops engineer would need to be in SCOM to see this, or in CloudWatch for the AWS side, or in Azure Portal for the Azure side. 3 different tools, 3 different logins, no combined picture. Your infrastructure doesn't know it's split across 3 platforms. Your team shouldn't have to pretend it is either. And SquaredUp allows you to bring all of that information into one set of dashboards, all using the same underlying source of truth. Let's now switch across to an application workspace. This one is actually the same workspace that Ash was demonstrating earlier, but my focus here is going to be on the application teams, the developers, the service owners, one layer closer to the user. Same red, green, amber logic applies, but now we're asking the question, is the application itself healthy, regardless of which platform it sits on? And the questions here tend to be different from the main infrastructure team. Are my applications performing as expected right now? Which alerts are real problems and which are noise? What caused the problem and who is affected by it and how badly? The infrastructure team thinks in servers and platforms. Application teams tend to think in terms of services, deployments, and user impact. Excuse me. Here you can see key applications no matter where they're running. The claim map is in AWS. You can see the plugins that are configured here. Azure DevOps, Google Cloud, Pingdom, SolarWinds Orion, and a generic web API call. The Telescope shop, that's a Kubernetes cluster running in AWS, but also servicing data from Grafana, Jaeger, and Prometheus. Parts Unlimited is predominantly running in Azure. The sales app is on-premise. We've got a bit of SCOM, ServiceNow, and Splunk in there. And SquaredUp Inc. is what Ash was just showing earlier, I believe, looking at or servicing data from Atlassian Jira, Pingdom, Zendesk, and from Azure. We don't have the time on this webinar to dig into each of them, and I'm actually going to do a separate webinar for each, otherwise we'd be here all night. But what we'll look at on future webinars is each of these applications and then building up from an application view, underlying infrastructure view, and surfacing all of that up to an executive view. The main takeaway from this is that these applications span AWS, Azure, and on-premises, and the health of the individual tiles, the applications themselves, and the overall dashboard, the overall health of key applications can be bubbled up to whichever stakeholders need to see it, be it team leaders, service managers, and executives. No one has to focus on the tool sets, the multiple logins, the multiple screens, Azure, AWS, Dynatrace, Datadog, SCOM. All the data you need is surfaced in SquaredUp Cloud tailored to the requirements of their stakeholders, irrespective of where the source of that data comes from. As a lead into the next set of webinars, I'll switch back to a few slides to show the types of information that we'll be showcasing. So these are the sorts of application dashboards that we'll be looking to build up on in the next sessions, and they'll include things like key performance metrics on one of the dashboards, looking at response times, error rates, throughput, the application index performance score for Dynatrace. There's always things. These are all the things we've already discussed, but then we'll get into more detail. We'll start to look at the correlation of pulling data together from multiple data sources, but then of also correlating that data, which again is the real power of SquaredUp Cloud. Which brings us on to the next slide. The correlation dashboard is what will make SquaredUp Cloud genuinely different from just opening up a single tool, a Dynatrace or a Datadog, or opening up an operations-focused dashboard. We'll surface data for an application that shows recent deployments from GitHub or Azure DevOps, and show on the same dashboard recent and open configuration changes, incidents, and changes, bringing in data from your service management tool, ServiceNow in our case, to help distinguish between something genuinely broke and something that was deliberately changed. Business and user impact dashboards are also key, both the detail for the application team, but also to surface with KPIs and SLAs and the health roll-ups to service managers and executives. If you can show this geographically, if it's relevant to your organization, this can be quite striking visually. Also, if you're tracking breadcrumbs with Splunk, then surfacing data from transactions can help showcase where a process is failing. You can, of course, do this in Splunk, but with SquaredUp Cloud, you can surface this Splunk data alongside other relevant data in a single dashboard. And synthetic monitors can also be a useful guide for end-user experience. You might be using Dynatrace or Datadog for this, or for on-premises applications, you might be using SCOM monitors. These will all help you identify when an application isn't functional from the outside, no matter what the internal metrics might say. And applications don't always fail in isolation, so it's important to have a dashboard for dependencies. A slow database will impact every application that touches it. If your application calls Stripe or Salesforce or any other external service, then show their status. If the checkout starts failing, then one of the first questions is whether it's us or is it a provider? Is it an external system that we depend upon? Message queues such as Kafka queues can be an indication that something is backing up. And don't forget the downstream health services that this application depends on. As we said at the start of this, applications don't always fail in isolation. All of which brings us back to the slide we looked at a while ago, using SquaredUp Cloud as your control and command center to surface data from multiple tool sets, to break the silo of those tool sets, to enable organizations to correlate data from across their tool sets and surface that data sliced and diced for each specific stakeholder, IT ops, engineers, team leads, service managers, and executives. Okay, let's quickly have a look at some pricing information as well. Pricing information is available at squaredup.com/pricing. For what we've seen today, you'll need an enterprise license, so that's from $5,616 per year, which gives you 5 interactive users. That's basically 5 users who can create dashboards and who can drill down through the dashboards, but it gives you an unlimited number of actual dashboards themselves. So once your authors have created the dashboard, they can share that to other stakeholders, to service managers, team leads, to executives. There's no additional cost for those shared dashboards. There's an unlimited number of dashboards that you're free to create, and an unlimited number of data sources as well. The enterprise tier also comes with Smart Assist AI authoring, and we'll have separate sessions looking at the AI capabilities that are coming with SquaredUp Cloud. By all means, reach out to sales licensing for more in-depth information on that. And next up What I'd suggest first of all is contacting us for a personalised demonstration. Everything I've done today has almost been, by necessity, been quite generalised because all the environments here will be different. You'll all be using different tool sets. So contact the sales teams, give us a bit of information about your environment, what you're looking to achieve, and we can set up a personalised demonstration for you. And in tandem with that, sign up for SquaredUp Cloud for free for a 14-day evaluation, and we can then help work with you to implement that personalized demonstration in your environment so that you can see the value and start to know what it's doing. Test. And finally, thank you very much for attending this webinar. I hope you'll join us again when we start building up the applications and then bubbling those health states up to executive level dashboards.